time to paint the walls. Let's put on some real music.
She painted the bathroom in April. She wants to say that without making it larger than it was, because the risk with the story of a woman rebuilding is always that the small things get inflated into symbols, and the symbols get inflated into revelations, and what was actually just a Saturday afternoon with a roller and a can of the softest gray-green paint she had ever seen gets turned into a climactic moment of triumph. It was not that. It was a Saturday afternoon. She put on old clothes and opened the windows and put music on. Real music. Music she loved rather than background noise. And she painted the walls of her bathroom. And when she was done, she stood in the doorway and looked at what she had made and felt a quiet, private satisfaction that belonged entirely to her. Nobody else was there to see it. Nobody else's opinion of it existed inside the moment. It was hers. The color was hers. The afternoon was hers. That was the whole of it. That was enough. She had been in the apartment for 14 months. She had been in therapy for 8 months. She had been painting small watercolors, Sunday mornings, face down when finished, for 6 months. She had been walking in the mornings for almost a year. She had said no to things. She had said yes to things she wanted, tentatively, awkwardly, with the particular self-consciousness of someone doing something they were taught was selfish and her slowly unlearning that lesson one yes at a time. She had had honest conversations with Emma, with Margaret, with Dr. Simmons, and occasionally in the mirror with herself, and she had survived them. She had not fixed everything. Her financial situation was still precarious, and she was still finding her footing at work, and the grief of the marriage and all that it had cost her was still present, still real, sitting not at the front of her chest anymore, but further in, where it was woven into the fabric of who she was becoming rather than blocking the doorway of who she could be. She had not fixed everything. She had just slowly, steadily, painstakingly begun to live inside her own life. She noticed the ring one morning in May. She had still been wearing it. Left hand, third finger, the same position it had occupied for 17 years. Not because she was holding on, or at least not primarily because of that, but because it had become so thoroughly part of the physical landscape of her hand that she forgot it was a choice. She was washing dishes, and the morning light caught it, and she looked at it for a long time. She thought about the woman who had put it on, 29 years old, standing in a hallway with flowers in her hair, feeling something she had dismissed as nerves. She thought about the 17 years the ring had been there, and everything those years had contained. And then she took it off, not with anger, not with ceremony. She took it off the way you take off a coat when you've come in from the cold and no longer need it. She put it in a small wooden box on her dresser, not thrown away, not forgotten, just set down. She was done carrying it. She had not expected to feel like herself. She wants to be accurate about this because the story of transformation is almost always told as the story of return. You find yourself as if the self were a fixed and known quantity that had simply been misplaced and could be recovered intact. That was not what happened to Catherine. What happened was stranger and more interesting than that. She did not find the person she had been before. She found someone new, someone who contained the person she had been before, who carried the memory of that woman with love and a kind of aching tenderness, but who was not identical to her, who had been changed by everything she had passed through in ways that were not reversible and that she did not want to reverse. The woman she was becoming was 45 years old and had been through a dissolution and had come out the other side with fewer illusions and more capacity for reality than she had ever possessed. She was quieter than the woman she had been in her 20s, slower to react, slower to perform, faster to know her own mind, less interested in being liked, more interested in being honest, not enlightened, not healed, just more fully, specifically, intransigently herself. Her work changed. She had been given a project at the marketing firm, a campaign for a small nonprofit, the kind of project that larger accounts departments overlooked, and she had approached it with a creative thoroughness that surprised her colleagues and more than slightly surprised herself. She had opinions. She had aesthetic instincts that she had not accessed in years, that the painting had been gradually waking up, that the Sunday mornings at the kitchen table had been slowly reanimating. She had walked into a presentation and defended a creative direction with a confidence that was not performed, It was grounded, it was specific, it came from somewhere she recognized as her own. Afterward, her manager had said, simply and with visible surprise, "Where has this been?" And Catherine had not answered that question, because the answer was too large and too personal for that conversation. But she had thought about it in the car on the way home. It had been everywhere. It had been underneath everything. It had been waiting with a patience that was almost unreasonable for her to create the conditions in which it could exist. She made friends she had chosen for herself for the first time in years. This was different from the friendships of her marriage, which had been social infrastructure as much as genuine connection. The couples they knew, the school parents, the women she saw at events and called friends because they occupied the same circumference of her life. She began going to a life drawing class on Thursday evenings. She had found it by accident, seen a flyer in the window of the art supply store, and had stood on the sidewalk for several minutes talking herself out of and then back into it. The class was mostly women. Most of them were in their 40s and 50s. Most of them had a quality she had not encountered in a social setting in a very long time, a willingness to be exactly who they were without managing the impression it created. She began to look forward to Thursdays, not because the drawing was transformative or because the friendships were deep yet, but because it was a room full of women who had chosen to be there, doing something they wanted to do without apology. She called David once, about 8 months after the divorce was final. She had thought about this call for a long time, not to plan what to say, but to understand why she wanted to make it. And what she understood was that she did not want to have a difficult conversation or to relitigate anything or to assign or accept blame. She called because she wanted to say, simply and genuinely, that she did not hate him, that she understood that two people can love each other and still be wrong for each other in ways that become visible only when enough time has passed and enough honesty has accumulated, that she was grateful in ways she could not have articulated 18 months earlier, for the life they had built together and for the children who were its truest and best product. And she called because she wanted to say it for herself, not for him, not to achieve anything, but because it was true and because saying true things had become, in the past year, something she practiced with new intention. He had been quiet for a long time after she spoke, and then he had said thank you, and that had been enough. She went back to the gallery, not the one where she had shown work 20 years ago. That one was gone, as most things from 20 years ago are gone, but a small gallery in the neighborhood, the kind that shows local artists and keeps its prices modest and smells pleasantly of old wood and possibility. She went on a Sunday afternoon, alone, and moved slowly through the rooms and looked at the things people had made and felt the particular fullness of being inside art, not consuming it, not evaluating it, but being with it, the way you are with something that speaks a language your brain has not been required to translate. She stood in front of a small painting, abstract, mostly gray-green, with a single gesture of warm color cutting through the center, and felt something rise in her chest that took her a moment to identify. It was not sadness. It was not grief. It was longing. The specific, alive longing of someone who knows what they want and is close enough to it now to feel its warmth. She stood in front of that painting for a long time. When she left, she felt the afternoon pressing warmly and fully against the whole of her. The watercolors were still face down. All of them, accumulated over 6 months of Sunday mornings, stacked carefully on the shelf in the spare bedroom that had gradually ceased to be a storage space and was becoming, slowly, something else. She went in one evening in June and turned them over one by one, not to judge them, not to evaluate them against any standard she had once held. She looked at each one with the eye of someone who had spent 6 months making things with no audience in mind and was now, for the first time, permitting herself to see what she had made. They were good. Not all of them, but some of them. More importantly, they were hers, unambiguously, uncompromisingly hers, made for no one, reflecting no one's preferences or expectations, containing nothing but her own private relationship with color and feeling and the particular quality of Sunday morning light in her apartment. She held one of them, a wash of blue she had made in November during one of the darkest months, and she thought, I was here. I was always here. Underneath everything. making things in the dark, waiting. She had lost her marriage. She had lost her home. She had lost the social identity built around being David's wife and the Marlowes as a unit. She had lost the version of the future she had imagined, the growing old together version, the grandchildren in that house version, the version where continuity was guaranteed and the shape of everything was known. She had lost a decade of her best professional years to the domestic infrastructure of a life that no longer existed. She named these losses carefully and with full weight because she had learned that the story of transformation requires an honest accounting of cost. That saying, "It made me who I am," without first saying, "and here is what it cost," is a kind of dishonesty she was no longer capable of. It had cost her enormously. She would never pretend otherwise. And inside the cost, inside the ruins of everything she had lost, she had found the woman she had been trying to describe to people her whole life and never quite managed. Not a new woman, not a reinvented woman, the original one, the one who had been painting in a first apartment on a morning 20 years ago, full and free and entirely, unapologetically there. She had found her. She had been here all along. There is something that Catherine says now when people ask her, and they do ask her because she has become, without seeking it and without particularly advertising it, someone that other women want to talk to. She says it simply, without dramatic weight, in the tone of someone reporting an observation rather than pronouncing a truth. She says, "The life I had before didn't end. It finished." And she means something very specific by that distinction. An ending is an interruption, something cut off before it was supposed to be over, severed mid-sentence, leaving a story unresolved. A finishing is different. A finishing is the completion of a thing that has been fully lived, that has served its purpose, that has given everything it had to give, that has run the natural length of its particular story. Her marriage finished. Her former self finished. The woman who disappeared into other people's needs lived fully and gave everything she had and ran out of road. She did not fail. She finished. And what came after finishing was not less. It was entirely, irreversibly, astonishingly more. She understands now what she could not have understood while she was still inside it. You cannot see the shape of a thing when you are in the middle of it. You cannot understand what a particular phase of your life was doing to you, and for you, until you are far enough from it to see its outline. What she understands now, from the far side of dissolution, is that the losing had been necessary in ways that do not justify the pain, but do, perhaps, make sense of it. She could not have found herself inside the structure of her former life. The structure was too complete. There were no gaps in it large enough for her to squeeze through, no unoccupied space in which a self that was separate from all those roles could have stood and breathed and taken shape. She had needed the structure to collapse. She had needed the floor to disappear beneath her feet. Not because suffering is instructive in some simple, consoling way. She does not believe that, but because she had built a life that could hold everyone except herself. And a life that cannot hold you is not a life. It is a performance of one. She thinks about the woman she was teaching her daughter to become. Not just Emma, all three of her children in different ways and different degrees. She had been teaching them, by the example of her own lived experience, what love required, what looked like, what cost. She had been showing them, day after day, year after year, that love meant the complete subordination of yourself to someone else's comfort. That a good woman was an invisible woman. That need was weakness and boundaries were selfishness, and the truest expression of devotion was the quiet, faithful erasure of your own desires. She had not meant to teach them this. She would never have chosen to teach them this. She had believed she was demonstrating strength. She understands now that the most powerful thing she is doing for her children is not the cooking or the scheduling or the 17 years of showing up. It is this: the last 18 months of learning, painfully and imperfectly and in full view of them, how to be a person who does not disappear. That is what she is leaving them. That is the truest inheritance she has. She does not think of herself as someone who has a story of loss. She thinks of herself as someone who has a story of excavation. of going deep enough into the ruins of a life she had outgrown to find what was still alive at the bottom of it. And what she found, the painting, the voice that says no, the mornings that belong to her, the capacity for joy that no longer requires permission. The woman in the apartment with the gray-green walls and the brush on the windowsill and the small paintings stacked face up on the shelf. What she found was not new. It had been there since she was 26, standing in that first apartment, full and free and making noise. It had been there her whole life, patient and stubborn and entirely unwilling, as it turned out, to disappear completely even when she had done nearly everything to ensure it. It had survived. She had survived it. And survival, she has learned, is sometimes what transformation looks like from the outside. From the inside, it feels like arriving. She thought she was losing her life. She was only losing the version of herself that had been built for survival. The performance, the service, the seamless, capable sufficiency that had served her so well and cost her so much. She was losing the Catherine who said yes automatically and smiled the practice smile and carried everything alone and had forgotten, somewhere in the middle of carrying, that she was allowed to put things down. She was losing the woman who had stood at the top of that staircase on her wedding day and dismissed what she felt as nerves. She was losing the artist who had put away her materials because a table needed to be clear by Thursday. She was losing all of it, and it was brutal, and it was real, and it was the best and most necessary thing that had ever happened to her. And underneath all the losing, waiting with the extraordinary patience of something that has never stopped being true, was the woman she had always been. The one who had been there in the first apartment and in the gallery and in the spare bedroom with the brush and in the kitchen on Sunday mornings with the watercolors and the light. The one who had, finally, after a very long time, been found. Not by anyone else, by herself, which was, as it turned out, the only finding that had ever mattered. Sometimes the life that breaks you is the life that introduces you to yourself. She did not lose everything. She lost the weight of everything. She lost the performance of everything. She lost the version of her life that had no room in it for the truest, most difficult, most necessary version of herself. And what remained? What was left when the loss had finished, when the dissolution was complete, when the floor had given way and she had fallen through to whatever was underneath? What remained was this: a woman alone, alive, imperfect, uncertain, standing in an apartment she has made her own, with paint on her hands and a brush on the windowsill and a question she is finally, after everything, brave enough to ask. Not who was I? Not who should I be? But simply, who am I? Asked not with fear. Asked with the particular, hard-won, utterly irreplaceable calm of someone who has been to the bottom of herself and found, to her own astonishment, that there was something there. You stayed. You watched all 4 chapters of this story. You sat with Catherine through the mirror and the messages and the floor and the dark and the brushes and the gray-green paint. And we want to say something to you before you go. If any part of this story lives somewhere inside your own life, if you recognize the disappearing or the 4 a.m. wait, or the loneliness of being surrounded and still completely unknown, or the specific devastation of realizing you gave your best years to something that did not hold you in return, then this message is for you specifically. You're not too far gone. You're not too old. You're not too broken or too tired or too far behind. Catherine was 44 years old on the floor of a 3rd-floor apartment, eating crackers and feeling nothing. And she found her way back, not to who she was before, to someone better, someone who had always been there. And so can you. We want to hear from you in the comments. Tell us, which chapter of Catherine's story are you in right now? Are you in chapter 1, disappearing quietly, performing fine, carrying everything alone? Are you in chapter 2, something is just broken and the floor has given way? Are you in chapter 3, making your bed, saying no for the first time, finding the brushes? Or are you already in chapter 4, painting your bathroom gray-green on a Saturday afternoon, just for yourself, because you finally can? Tell us. Be honest. Because the woman who is about to find this video at 3 a.m. in the middle of her chapter 2 needs to see your comment. She needs to know this story in somewhere real. Your words could be the thing that reaches her. If Catherine's story meant something to you, If you're going to think about her tomorrow or next week or the next time you automatically say yes to something you mean to say no to, please like this video. Please share it with someone who needs it. Please subscribe because we're not done telling stories like this one. Stories of women who lost themselves and found something truer in the losing. Stories that don't clean up the darkness too quickly or arrive at hope too easily or pretend that transformation is anything other than long, hard, completely ordinary, and entirely worth it. That is what we do here, and we are so glad, more than we can adequately say, that you were here for this one.